The chamber was cold, not from malfunction, but from deliberation. At the heart of Earth's orbital citadel, silence settled like a shroud before execution. Admiral Kiera Solas stood beneath the towering dome of the Terran strategic nexus, her figure still as the planet below. Earth spun quietly beyond the transparent walls, blue and brilliant and unaware that, moments ago, its fate had been sealed. She had watched the transmission 12 times, though once would have been enough. The verdict was clear. By majority vote of the Galactic Assembly, humanity had been expelled, all protections nullified, all obligations severed. All human colonies, from the lush gardens of New Solari to the frozen outposts of Kepler Station, offered as tribute to the Vorkwal Hive in exchange for galactic peace. 52 years of loyalty, 52 years of shared wars, joint discoveries, and bleeding side by side with alien allies. Now, with one cold declaration, it had all been erased. Behind her, the chamber doors hissed open. Commander Reese approached, his voice subdued but steady. "Admiral, transmission confirmed. All fleet outposts are receiving the evacuation directive. We've begun relocation efforts from New Solari and the Marius Enclave." She didn't look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the Earth below. "How many?" she asked. 74 colonies within immediate threat range, 60 more in fringe zones. Civilian count, 920 million. Almost a billion lives, she thought. Teachers, builders, children, people who had turned hostile rocks into homes, who had raised generations under stars that were never theirs, who had believed in something bigger than Earth. "Are we not fighting?" Reese asked. Solas turned then, walking slowly to the central console. Her steps were deliberate, her breath measured. She activated the fleet-wide broadcast system. One line connected every Terran vessel, every colony, every outpost still listening. "To all Terran ships and stations," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "this is Admiral Kiera Solas. Effective today, Earth is no longer a member of the Galactic Assembly. Our colonies are no longer protected. Our people have been abandoned in favor of peace." She looked up, as if the stars themselves might be listening. "We will not contest this decision. We will not strike first. We will not become the monsters they expect. We will do what we have always done. We will survive. We will adapt." She paused, her voice softening, but only just. "We will leave, but the stars will remember us." She closed the channel. In the following days, humanity moved with an efficiency born not of anger but of clarity. Civilian ships formed convoys escorted by what remained of the depleted defense fleet. Colonies shut down infrastructure, data archives were sealed, and research stations were disassembled down to their molecular cores. Earth's finest minds, scientists, engineers, and historians worked in lockstep with soldiers, farmers, and students. Across the system, the evacuation unfolded like a funeral procession for a civilization betrayed. But there was no rage, no riot, only resolve. And then reality itself began to tremble. It began subtly. Quantum sensors reported inconsistent values. On the navigation decks of long-range scouts, stars dimmed for fractions of seconds, blinking in ways no variable star ever should. One probe sent to monitor the retreat of human settlements reported a child's toy spinning in midair, not falling, not floating, but caught in decision. On Kepler Station, a crew member dropped a stylus and watched it hover for 4 seconds before it remembered gravity. The council dismissed the anomalies, blamed faulty readings. But in the sealed labs of the Hawking Array, where Earth's quantum physicists had gone quiet. Panic brewed behind composed silence. The data was real. Something was unraveling. In a darkened lounge aboard the flagship Enduring Light, Kiera Solas sat with her officers, not on the bridge but in the galley, the only place that still smelled of coffee and warmth. Her officers gathered not for orders but for answers. "What if we didn't leave?" Commander Imani asked, staring into a chipped mug. "What if we stayed and fought?" Solas didn't answer right away. The weight of such a question didn't allow for easy words. "They expect that," she said finally. "They want us to lash out. They want us to be what they've always feared, wild, uncontrolled. But what are we without the assembly?" Dr. Liu asked, his voice raw. "We shaped ourselves to fit them. We studied their ethics, their structures." "No," Solas said firmly. "We showed them what ethics meant. It was our philosophers who defended sentient rights for the Karu, our engineers who stabilized the solar bridges over Lai's Tau. We didn't mimic them. We upheld them. We taught them what it meant to have a conscience." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the recognition of legacy, one deeper than political treaties or shared star charts. It was the legacy of choice. Back on Earth, protests filled cities not with violence but with questions. Why had the Council abandoned them? How could peace be purchased at the cost of human lives? But amid the chaos, a quiet movement arose. Not from generals but philosophers. They called it temporal stewardship. Its central premise was simple, terrifying, and beautiful. That human consciousness, its stubborn sense of time, of linear memory, of sequence, was the glue that held causality together. That in a galaxy filled with species who remembered the future as easily as the past, humanity's linear perception was an anchor, a fulcrum upon which the universe turned. In abandoning humanity, the Assembly hadn't just lost allies. They had unmoored time itself. On the final night before Earth's signal went dark, Solas stood in the Great Hall of Memory. It was the same place Earth had first signed the accession charter decades ago. Now it was empty, save for the whisper of winds through glass arches and the fading hum of once hopeful dreams. She wore no uniform, only a long black robe, a ceremonial echo of Earth's past. "They expect us to rage," she said, her voice echoing in the silence. "But humanity is more than fury. We are storytellers. We are witnesses. We are builders of meaning. We are not leaving because we are weak. We are leaving because we choose not to become like them." She paused, looking upward. "They will ask one day, where did the humans go? Why did the stars dim? Why did cause forget effect? And the answer will be in every child who remembers a lullaby, in every world that once knew warmth. We are memory. We are the shape of time." She stepped from the dais. No applause followed, only silence, a silence that spread across the stars. Within hours, the first probe dispatched by the Council to monitor the abandoned colonies returned broken. Its logs stuttered through garbled code. It had tried to scan what remained of New Solari but found it undecided. Cities flickered in and out of being. Roads led to destinations that had never been constructed. The sun above the colony rose, then reversed, then flickered again. Its final message was fragmented. Meaning lost, observer absent, time fraying. Then it fell silent forever. Aboard the evacuation flagship Auroral Edge, Kiera Solas walked the long corridors between refugee decks. Children slept on makeshift cots, cradled by exhausted parents. Among them, a small boy stood and saluted her clumsily. "Admiral," he asked, "are we running away?" She knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his tousled hair. "No, child," she said softly. We're not running, we're leaving a message." He tilted his head. "A message to who?" "To everyone," she said, eyes glinting. "To the stars, and one day they'll read it." Then she stood and walked away, leaving behind a boy, a question, and a truth the galaxy was only beginning to understand. That the storm had already begun. But this time, it was time itself that would shatter. The stars grew quieter. Not darker, not colder, just quieter. In the days following Admiral Sola's final transmission, the Terran fleets moved with eerie precision. Ships that once charted trade routes and war patrols now formed sweeping arcs of exodus, each guided by encrypted instructions known only to their AI cores and a few surviving command officers. No destination was publicly listed. No farewells broadcast. No alliances renewed. Humanity was vanishing, not retreating. Vanishing. Entire colonies powered down in synchronized intervals, as though part of a plan designed decades before the betrayal. Terraforming machines stopped mid-cycle. Orbital habitats shut off life support not in malfunction but by choice. Even Mars, cradle of early expansion, fell silent as if exhaling its final breath. And Earth, once vibrant with global traffic, communications, and culture, became a quiet blue sphere wrapped in silence. No one fired a shot. No one gave chase. The humans were simply gone. It wasn't until the assembly sent probes that they realized something far stranger had occurred. The first probe reached Jupiter's orbit and transmitted back what should have been a standard report: planetary data, gravimetric readings, solar metrics. But the data was inconsistent. From one moment to the next, the number of moons around Jupiter fluctuated. Sometimes 16, sometimes 62, once 0. The onboard AI flagged the anomaly, corrected itself, and reported a faulty sensor. Then it tried to transmit Earth's location and failed. Not because Earth had moved, but because Earth wasn't there in any definable sense. The sphere existed. Oceans still glittered under sunlight. But long-range scans passed through it as though it were transparent. Geostationary satellites flickered in and out of detection. Photons returned, incomplete, as though the planet were more concept than matter. That was the first clue, but not the last. Dr. Malin Varick had always believed in facts. A theoretical physicist from the Inherani species, he had spent 3 decades studying dimensional resonance theory. He had no patience for mysticism or speculative philosophies. And yet, as he stood aboard the observation deck of the Council's flagship Equinox, staring at the Sol system, he found himself wondering whether faith had replaced fact. "There are gravitational echoes," his assistant murmured beside him, nervously adjusting the metallic folds of her translator mask. "But no matter. It's like the planets cast shadows without existing." Varick blinked his second set of eyes, turning to her. "Shadows of what?" She hesitated. "Of memory, perhaps." The instruments confirmed the impossible. Human infrastructure existed, but didn't. Cities could be seen from orbit sometimes, but disappeared under certain scanning wavelengths. Even the sun's corona had changed spectral signature, pulsing in quantum rhythms that defied known physics. The more they observed, the less real the system became. It was as if reality itself no longer knew what Earth was supposed to be, or if it had ever been. That's when the first Ghost Protocol activation occurred. The event happened on Zenthari Prime, a neutral research world near the old human zone. A cargo drone operated by the Vex Imperium, attempted to interface with a dormant human data vault left behind on one of the outposts. The moment contact was made, the vault activated, emitting a signal across multiple quantum frequencies. The data that emerged wasn't encrypted, it wasn't even hostile, it was a story. A voice, female, warm human speaking over static like a lullaby filtered through a dying radio. If you are hearing this, it means we've already gone, not just beyond stars, but beyond knowing. You are not alone, but you must learn to stand without us. And then came equations, pure math, elegant and recursive, not weapons data, not military logs. It described how to generate stable linear causality fields using a framework of consciousness and time perception. Varric read the equations 23 times. They shouldn't work. They did work. What disturbed him most was the implication embedded in the structure, that the human brain hadn't just passively experienced time, it had shaped it. Reality had relied on them not because of power, but because of how they believed the universe was supposed to behave. They didn't merely observe cause and effect, they demanded it. The term Ghost Protocol quickly took root across Council space. It referred to a series of coordinated human withdrawals followed by localized disruptions in spacetime coherence. There were patterns. Where humans left, memory stuttered. Chronologies contradicted. Physics hesitated. On the merchant world of Tralles, a historian awoke to find her entire archive had rewritten itself. Civilizations she had studied no longer existed in their records. One of the moons her people orbited had a name no one remembered giving it, Solari Minor, and it bore traces of human structures, though no one had recollection of a human presence there. In the Vrex annexed zones, things were worse. Conquest fleets would arrive to occupy former human colonies, only to find planets flickering between lush jungle and barren rock. Commanders received victory reports for battles that hadn't occurred. Orders contradicted themselves mid-transmission. In one case, a Vrex commander reportedly aged 3 decades in a single hour, while his crew remained untouched. The council convened emergency hearings. No answers came, because no one could track what didn't follow cause and effect. One night, if such a thing could still be measured, Varric sat alone, staring at an ancient human archive stored on a quantum shard salvaged from Mars. It was a fragment from the Athena Library, one of Earth's great historical databases. The last line of the record kept him awake. "We are not leaving because we were defeated. We are leaving because you asked us to stop being human and we could not, so we became something else." It was signed with a single name, Solas. He understood then. The exodus was not an escape. It was a recalibration. Humanity had chosen not just to disappear, but to remove themselves from the narrative altogether, to no longer be participants in a galaxy that betrayed its conscience. And in doing so, they had exposed the galaxy's most terrifying truth, that without humanity, time might stop making sense. On a backwater listening station near the edge of Vorqual-controlled space, a technician monitoring quantum fluctuations observed something odd. A repeating signal hidden beneath radiation pulses. Not language, not code, just a rhythm, 2 pulses, then 3, then 5, then 8, a Fibonacci sequence, repeating infinitely, human fingerprints. The technician hesitated, then answered. The moment he did, every screen across the station lit up. Words appeared. "You still remember, that means you still exist." Then the lights died, and nothing worked the same afterward. From that moment forward, it became clear that the Ghost Protocol wasn't just a failsafe. It was a test. a test of whether the galaxy could remember what it had lost, whether it could rebuild causality without leaning on human consciousness, and whether it could learn what the humans had understood all along. That reality isn't something you exist in. It's something you agree upon. Admiral Solas aboard the Auroral Edge stood once more at the observation deck, not looking back but forward. Before her stretched a nebula of uncharted dimensions not mapped in space but in meaning. Behind her, Earth was no longer a location. It was a legacy, one of choice, of consciousness, of consequence. "Begin Phase 2, she said quietly, and across the remaining human fleets scattered, hidden, waiting, lights flared. Not weapons, beacons they would leave, but not in silence and never without a trace. The child was born yesterday. At least that's what the midwife remembered. But today the mother claimed she had never been pregnant, and the records agreed with her. The infant, meanwhile, sat quietly in her arms, blinking up at a sky that no longer carried the same color it did yesterday. The sun rose from the north now, or maybe it always had. No one could say for sure. In the outer spirals of council space, reality was not dying, it was forgetting. And in its forgetting, the galaxy began to choke on its own uncertainty. A science vessel above Antares Roman 9 logged 13 moons on first arrival. An hour later, its systems showed only 11. One of the missing satellites, previously named by a cartographer, had a recorded history of 2 millennia. Entire mythologies revolved around it. Songs, epics, textbooks. Now it was anecdote. The crew of the vessel argued in real time. Some remembered the moon vividly. Others had no recollection of it ever existing. A fight broke out on the observation deck. And then, as the argument escalated, one of the scientists collapsed, not from injury but from temporal dissonance. Her mind had simply refused to choose a version of reality. Across the sectors once bordering human territory, a pattern emerged. Planets began exhibiting temporal fragmentation. Some regressed biologically. Forests de-aged, turning from thick canopies into moss-covered craters. Other planets aged forward, collapsing into dry husks devoid of atmosphere. Civilizations flickered. In one system, a mining world appeared populated one day, deserted the next, and fully industrialized the day after that, each version with full infrastructure and history. But no one remembered which one had been real. On Trenthari, a planetary governor wrote in his journal at midnight, "Today, we celebrated the 500th anniversary of settlement." By morning, the entry had changed. It now read, "We broke ground on the colony today. Spirits are high." When he read it, he burst into tears. He didn't know which version of his people he was supposed to be leading anymore. The worst reports came from former human colony zones. Their causality had become negotiable. Children remembered futures that hadn't occurred. Crops grew backward. Machines refused to fail or refused to work at all, depending on who looked at them. And in every case, at the edge of uncertainty, remnants were found. A park bench made of Terran steel. A school bell that chimed the anthem of Earth. A book titled Time is the Shape of Memory, written in 9 languages, none of which had ever existed before. Wherever the reality broke, it broke around the memory of humans, as if they were placeholders for meaning. Dr. Malin Varick had not slept in 6 days. His lab aboard the Equinox had become a graveyard of discarded theories. No model accounted for the scale of collapse, not quantum instability, not dark matter interaction, not dimensional fatigue. Nothing worked except the theory he refused to publish. He called it the witness principle. It postulated that reality required observation, but more specifically that some species observed in linear time more effectively than others. Most council races experience time as a tapestry, loops, branches, rewinds. Humans, however, experience time as a blade, sharp, forward, unyielding. They didn't just watch events unfold, they forced them into order. Cause, then effect, question, then answer, always with intention, always insisting on sequence. And without them, the universe had begun to dethread, not because they were powerful, but because they were narrators. One day, on a remote outpost near the Perseid Vale, a communications officer named Lyrics received a signal she couldn't trace. It came in whispers, not in a language, but in emotion, sorrow, nostalgia, love, and a single phrase: "We watched you grow, now you must watch yourselves." She wept uncontrollably and didn't know why. The Council's attempts to stabilize regions using artificial observers failed. They built drone networks designed to mimic human cognition, infused with neural patterns scraped from Terran archives. But the drones didn't hold. They collapsed into contradiction. One drone reported a star system with 2 suns, then 5, then none. It declared in a final transmission, "I cannot observe what I do not believe." It disintegrated moments later. On the 3rd anniversary of humanity's exodus, a memorial was held on the former neutral world of Avar 6. No humans attended. The memorial was simple, a stone ring suspended in orbit, etched with the phrase, "You were the ones who remembered." Only 23 vessels showed up. Only 9 made it home. 2 vanished without trace. 1 arrived home before it had departed. 1 returned, but crewed by completely different species. No explanation. Then came the event known as the Silence Pulse. On a Tuesday that became a Thursday halfway through, every communications array in Council space went dark for exactly 7 minutes. When they came back online, every display showed a single sentence, translated perfectly in every known dialect, including extinct ones. Without the witness, the moment unravels. No source, no signal origin, but every world that read it experienced synchronicity, clocks aligned, causal chains restored. For 7 hours, time stabilized. Then the memory faded and causality broke again. Varric began receiving visitors, philosophers, historians, warriors, even High Counselor Vextai came. They sat in his chamber surrounded by fractal displays and whispering machines. "We need to understand what they were," she said quietly, "before the entire galaxy forgets what we are." Varric nodded. He pulled up a memory simulation, not a video, not a reconstruction, but a narrative event, rebuilt from human neural coding. A child played with a wooden toy, dropped it. It bounced 3 times, then it rolled. Simple, but within that simplicity was direction. No other species had ever recorded such obsessive fidelity to sequence. The toy didn't fall just because of gravity. It fell because the child believed it must, and the universe, ever eager to oblige, agreed. That, Varric said, is what they gave us. Story. Out there somewhere, the humans still watched. Not from behind stars, not from cloaked ships, from elsewhere. Outside the thread they once wove for the rest of existence. They watched as the galaxy floundered without them, not in punishment but in hope. Hope that their absence would become the teacher their presence never could. And perhaps one day the galaxy would finally understand that time is not a river, it is a choice. And reality belongs to those who are brave enough to remember. 7 years before the day humanity vanished, a small signal came from a hidden research base called Helios 5. The signal lasted exactly 3. 14 seconds and then disappeared. No one noticed. Helios 5 was just one of many quiet human stations built far out on the edge of explored space. The area around it was called the Silent Wall, a strange, empty zone where most species avoided travel. There were no weapons there, no trade, no resources. But carved into the wall of the base, written in old Terran script, were two words: Project Aletheia, the truth. At the center of Helios 5 was a scientist named Dr. Lyra Vaughn. She was not famous. She didn't speak at the great conferences. She didn't lead starship designs or military strategy. But she was one of Earth's top experts in a strange new field, temporal cognition, the study of how thought shapes time. Many scientists from other species laughed at her theories. They believed time was fixed, something you measured, not something you could change. But Lyra believed something different. She believed that observers, people who look at the world, help shape what is real, especially humans. In the ice tunnels below Helios 5, her team found something strange. A zone of space where reality acted wrong. Water boiled in cold vacuum. Music played from silent rocks. Fish swam through the air. None of it made sense until a human walked into the room. The moment a person looked at the event and believed what should happen, the strange thing stopped. The world corrected itself because someone expected it to. That's when Lyra realized the truth. The laws of physics were not broken in these zones. They were simply waiting for someone to tell them how to behave. Humanity didn't just live in the universe. Humanity gave the universe direction. Most species experience time as waves, spirals, or many paths at once. But humans, they saw time as a line, one step, then the next, always forward, always building. That focus, that belief in cause and effect had kept reality stable. And the others, they had been living inside a story written by humanity's mind. Lyra returned to Earth with her findings. The assembly ignored her. They called her theories impossible. But her message reached the right ears. The High Command, the deep archives, and most importantly, Admiral Solas. Together they began to plan, not for war, not for revenge, but for something bigger, something new, a way to give humanity the freedom they had never been allowed, and a way to show the galaxy the truth about what they had lost. They called it the Ghost Line. For the next 5 years, humanity quietly built strange machines across dozens of hidden worlds. They were not weapons. They did not glow with power. Most looked like black stone spheres or silent rings of metal. These were translation cores, gateways not for ships but for minds. Each was powered not by energy but by belief. And each one could only be activated by a human with one clear thought: it's time to leave the story behind. The machines did not open doors, they erased them. They folded space and time around those who entered, removing them from the timeline entirely. No death, no travel, just exit. Dr. Lyra stood before the first machine on a cold night beneath a sky of falling stars. She had lost friends. She had been mocked, ignored, betrayed. But now her eyes were calm. She placed her hand on the device and whispered, "Let them forget us. Let them see what happens when no one tells the story anymore." The machine shimmered and she was gone. From that day forward, across the stars, a quiet countdown began. A signal was passed from ship to ship, colony to colony. A simple phrase: Ghost Line is active. The Great Retreat was not chaos, it was choreography. 1 billion humans stepped into machines they didn't fully understand, but they trusted. And as they vanished, the universe began to twist, not in anger, not in violence, but in confusion. because the voice that had been telling the story of reality for thousands of years had gone silent. On the day Earth vanished, the last message from the planet was broadcast in every known language. You asked us to stop being who we are, so we became something else. This is not war. This is not surrender. This is freedom. This is truth. Then Earth was not destroyed, just not present anymore. Even telescopes couldn't agree where it was. Now, years later, the galaxy wonders, where did they go? Why is time falling apart? And the answer is simple: humanity didn't run. Humanity didn't hide. They chose to stop holding the story together. And the universe, it has no idea what to do without them. It began with a scream from a dead planet. On the world of Alarin 5, long thought lifeless, a survey drone picked up what sounded like a child's voice echoing through the dust. When the voice was translated, it spoke one sentence: "Where is the day before today?" And then it vanished. The planet returned to silence. But the question remained hanging not just in the air, but in the minds of everyone who heard it. Where was yesterday? And what made today real? Across the old human border systems, the universe began to behave like a story that had forgotten its next page. Ships arrived at stations that had never been built. Soldiers fought battles that their memories couldn't place against enemies that didn't exist on any record. Some messages were delivered before they were sent. Others were never written but somehow remembered. Entire cities blinked in and out of existence. But what scared people the most was not the chaos. It was the flicker. Reality didn't break all at once. It stuttered, like a dream halfway remembered, like a thought lost mid-sentence. On the station Vandreli's Ark, built near the edge of the collapse zone, a communications officer named Nia kept a diary. She wrote in it daily, always by hand, always in the same ink. One day her entry simply vanished. The ink remained, but the words rearranged themselves into something else. The present no longer needs a past. She stared at the page in horror, then checked the others. Every entry she'd ever written was changing, shifting words, dates, even the handwriting. Some pages had been written by other versions of her, ones who had made different choices, ones who had lived different lives, but all of them were now part of her diary, and none of them felt completely hers. In the council chamber, High Counselor Vextai listened in silence as scientists, military officers, and philosophers all gave their reports. None of them made sense. Entire sectors no longer agreed on their own timelines. One planet claimed to have joined the Council 5 centuries ago. Another claimed that same planet had never been discovered. Trade routes vanished. Supply lines folded. Star systems became stories, shifting with every attempt to describe them. And worst of all, no one could tell which version of anything was real. Because there were no witnesses left, no humans. Dr. Malin Varick's lab was now considered sacred by many. He had become the closest thing the galaxy had to a prophet, though he refused the title. He preferred another word: student. He stood in front of a projection of the galaxy, its arms wrapped in rings of red, the collapse zones, and spoke to a room of leaders who no longer argued. They were too scared. "Reality is not a machine," he said. "It's a mirror. It reflects what we believe, what we agree upon, what we expect." And humans, he continued, expected time to move forward, one moment after another, clean, sharp, with meaning. He touched a control panel. The map zoomed in on a small region, a planet once colonized by humans. Now it blinked like a weak star. Without them, the story breaks. The Vorqual hive had taken much of human space after the Council's betrayal. They had feasted on it, expanded across it, claimed it. Now they were trapped in it. Their hives twisted, their memories looped. Queens gave birth to soldiers who were already dead. Eggs hatched into creatures with no name. Some hives remembered conquering Earth. Others said Earth had never existed. Still others had memories of being human themselves. The Vorkwal began to eat each other not for hunger but for meaning. They were predators. But now they didn't know what they were hunting, or if anything had ever been real at all. In a forgotten ruin deep within a collapsing moon, a Vex explorer found a human object. A child's toy, wooden, simple, handmade. It had no power source, but when he touched it, something strange happened. The walls around him stopped flickering. The floor beneath his feet became solid. The collapsing timeline froze, and for the first time in years he could breathe without confusion. He sat down, he held the toy gently, he whispered, "You remembered." The moment broke. The world continued to fall apart, but he never forgot that small, still moment of peace. Everywhere the collapse spread, fragments of humanity were left behind. Not machines, not weapons, but memories, stories told in song, stone carvings etched with emotion, empty chairs placed at tables that no longer existed, and sometimes people heard voices quiet, distant, like echoes in the back of their mind. Do you remember why you're here? Do you remember who you are? Do you remember us? In one system, the stars spelled out a phrase in gravitational patterns. The story isn't over, but you must write the next chapter. And across 100 worlds, beings who had once mocked human stubbornness began to whisper to each other in fear and wonder. Maybe the humans hadn't left to punish the galaxy. Maybe they had left to give it a chance to grow up, to force it to see what it could become without leaning on them, to see if it could remember itself. But the cracks were widening, and time was growing thin. The universe had been held together by belief, by story, by the sharp, forward arrow of the human mind. And now, with that mind gone, all that remained was the echo of its memory, and the hope that someone else, anyone else, could learn to believe in time the same way. Before the cracks became a fall, before the fall became silence, and before the silence became forever, the ship Lucent Reach drifted through the edge of the collapse zone, a place where stars blinked like unsure thoughts and space itself felt tired. Captain Selai of the Athari Republic stood on the bridge, her 4 eyes narrowed. She had seen impossible things in her life, gravity flowing sideways, planets vanishing mid-orbit, even days that ran backward. But this felt different. In the distance, a station floated above a shattered moon. Old, dead, human-made. Its power signatures were faint, almost too weak to notice, but something about it felt important, like a whisper that refused to be forgotten. "Approach slowly," she said. As the Lucent Reach closed in, one word appeared on their screens, repeated over and over in every language ever known: memory. They docked in silence. The station was dark, lit only by emergency lights that somehow still worked, even after all this time. Inside, everything was intact. Desks with notes, chairs still warm, coffee mugs half filled, but no people. It was like the humans had simply stepped away, or like they had been remembered into absence. And at the center of the station was the machine, a sphere of black metal floating in midair, humming gently. It gave no heat, no light, but it vibrated in a way that made the air feel alive. Dr. Kessin, the lead scientist on board, scanned it. His voice shook. "It's built on neural architecture, not mechanical, not even biological." He paused. "It's built from thought." They called it the memory engine, and it was far more than a machine. It was a mirror. When Kessin stood near it, he saw himself as a child reading his first book. then as a teenager holding his mother's hand as she died, then older, wiser, a version of himself that had never existed but somehow felt real. Each member of the crew saw something different, a memory, a hope, a grief, a truth. The engine was showing them not just who they were but how they remembered themselves. And more than that, it responded to their belief. When Kessin whispered, "I still remember Earth," the walls of the station turned warm, solid. Reality itself grew clearer, like the station was becoming more real just because he believed in it. The logs they recovered were fragmentary, but one stood out. A recording from a human voice, female, steady. "If you found this, the collapse has begun. That means we're gone. But we left this for you not to control but to understand. This engine runs on story. It needs a mind that remembers not just facts but meaning. Be careful. The stronger the mind, the stronger the effect. But if the story you tell is not true, you may rewrite more than you intend." Captain Selai paced in silence after hearing the message. The collapse was spreading faster. Entire systems had vanished just in the time it took to dock. They had no other tools left. No weapons, no math, only this. A machine built from memory and meaning. "Can we use it?" she asked Kessin. He hesitated. "Yes, but there's a cost." "What cost?" He looked up. "Us." Using the engine meant offering their minds to it, linking with the machine so it could rewrite reality through their memories. They would become part of the story, part of the foundation. And if they lost themselves, there would be no going back. But they all agreed, because the galaxy was falling, and someone had to remember how to hold it together. They entered the engine room together. One by one, they stepped forward and placed their hands on its surface. And one by one the sphere came alive. It spun, it glowed, it sang, not in sound but in memory. The crew's thoughts began to fuse, not just their thoughts, their meanings, a forgotten song from childhood, a moment of kindness from a stranger, a grief so deep it broke time, a hope so strong it mended it. The engine took all of it and wrote. Across nearby systems, time began to slow. Flickering stars steadied, planets found their place again. Even the cracks in space bent inward, stitching like scars healing under warmth. The collapse stopped, not everywhere but here. In this small part of the galaxy the story was holding, because someone was telling it, but the price was real. When the crew awoke, they were different. They remembered things that had never happened. They dreamed in timelines not their own. Kessin no longer knew what day it was because he remembered all days at once. Selai could no longer speak in a single language because her thoughts came in dozens. They were still themselves, but more, or maybe less. They had become anchors, and the engine needed more. Before leaving, they encoded one final message into the memory engine for whoever came next. "This is not a machine, it's a torch. We kept the flame alive. Now you must carry it, not with technology, but with memory, with meaning, with story. Time is not a law, it is a promise. Keep it." And with that they left the station, not to run, but to find others, because now they knew humanity had not given up. They had passed the pen. The next chapter was not yet written, but it could be, if someone remembered how. Captain Velter stood on the observation deck of the ship Seeker's Promise, staring into a sector of space where stars once lived. Now there was only silence, not darkness, not vacuum, but a kind of quiet that seemed aware, like a room just after someone leaves, or a heart that still feels a voice even when it's gone. She had been searching for 3 years, following faint trails of broken time, pieces of coordinates that didn't agree with each other, fragments of old human data left encoded in radiation pulses, star echoes, and forgotten debris. Most said she was chasing ghosts, but she knew better. She wasn't chasing, she was listening. It began again with a whisper, not through the ship's speakers, not on any known frequency, but in the minds of the crew, a shared thought, a shared voice. "You're close." Velter gasped, so did the others. No one had spoken, but everyone had heard it, different tone, different words, but the same message. They had found the edge, the place where reality and something else met, a boundary between timelines and something. Someone was on the other side. Dr. Yilmoth, the ship's dimensional physicist, pointed at the sensor map. "We're detecting signatures, like minds stretched across probability, human signatures. But they are not in space," he added. "They are around it. Not living in our timeline, but surrounding it, not dead, not physical, just there, existing in all possible versions of what had once been humanity." Then the transmission came. Not through a channel, not through light, but through resonance. The crew felt it as emotion first, a pulse of compassion, then curiosity, then deep aching sorrow, then finally peace, and with it came words, "We are still here." The voice was human and not. It spoke not as one person, but as many, dozens, hundreds, maybe all of them. "We see you, we remember you. We cannot return, but we never truly left." The bridge crew fell silent. Tears ran down more than one face. Velter stepped forward. She didn't use a transmitter, she just spoke. "To whoever you are, to whoever you've become, the galaxy is falling apart. We need help." The answer came gently. "We know, that's why we stayed." Another voice followed, higher, softer. "Most of us moved on, beyond time, beyond need, beyond identity, but some of us stayed behind. Not to punish, not to fix, but to hold." And suddenly the crew saw it, through the ship's sensors. Dim points of light scattered across the collapse zone. Not stars, not machines, but consciousness. Each one a human mind stretched between dimensions, anchoring the timeline, keeping space from forgetting itself. Each one sacrificing transcendence to keep reality stable until someone else could learn. "They didn't leave us," Yilmoth whispered. "They're buying us time." A final voice spoke, calm, clear. "You must understand, we didn't hold reality together with power. We held it with memory, with belief, with story. And now you must too." They left behind instructions, scattered across the stabilizer beacons, mathematical frameworks encoded in the shape of gravity waves, maps drawn in light curves, messages carved into the background radiation of the universe, each one teaching how to shape linear time, not as a rule but as a choice, a discipline, a way of thinking. Back aboard the Seeker's Promise, Captain Velter activated the ship's quantum relay. She spoke to every government, every research lab, every station still holding on. "They're still here, they're helping, but they can't do it forever. They left us not with weapons, not with laws, but with understanding. They showed us that time isn't a river. It's a road we walk together, and now we must learn to walk it." That night, while the crew slept, a message played again, softly, through every system still listening. Not a warning, not a threat, a blessing. "We believe in you. Write the story well. And remember, the universe doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be loved." The galaxy had known many kinds of dawn. The red dawns of war, when fleets rose like smoke across starfields. The silent dawns of treaties, where history changed in a signature. The hollow dawns after planets died, but this was different. This was the first dawn the galaxy had earned, not with strength, not with fear, but with understanding. It began quietly, as all real change does. A song shared between species who once couldn't even share food. A memory encoded in a child's drawing on a wall of a station that technically no longer existed. A prayer spoken in a dead language that someone else, somewhere else, still remembered. Dr. Malin Varick stood before the assembly, no longer shaking, no longer silent. Behind him glowed the latest data from the stabilizer beacons, the ones the last human minds had left behind. Each beacon was a mirror, each one reflecting not the past, but the possibility of a future. Not instructions for weapons or survival, but a blueprint for consciousness. They've taught us how, Varick said simply. Now we must choose, not to become human, but to become witnesses, to become observers who give the universe meaning again. No one laughed, not anymore. The temporal accord was passed in less than an hour, a miracle in a hall once ruled by argument. For once, every species agreed, not on what they were, not on how to govern, but on the one truth humanity had left behind. Time needs caretakers. Reality needs storytellers. Consciousness is not a side effect of life. It is the glue of the universe. Teams formed across the stars. Networks of minds linked not by race or politics, but by purpose. They studied human neural patterns, not to copy, but to understand. They trained themselves to perceive the world in sequence, to remember why before what, to think like a story, not a machine. The effects were slow at first. A star system that had been flickering stabilized. A space station that had never existed was remembered back into place, complete with crew and history. A planet with two timelines reconciled into one, a better one. And across the galaxy, reality began to choose, to hold shape, to stay together. Many who joined the networks changed. They saw time differently. They felt memory like heat. Some wept without knowing why, only to later understand they were carrying grief from another mind, another world. But they didn't let go. They didn't break. They held. And the galaxy held with them. On the day the last collapse zone stabilized, a message appeared at every beacon, written in symbols that somehow meant the same thing in every language. You remembered. You learned. You are ready. We are free. And one by one the last human minds, those who had anchored reality, gently faded, not into death, but into peace. Captain Velter stood once more on her ship's bridge, staring at the stars now shining without flicker. Her crew, once divided by species, now shared more than duty. They shared perspective. A scientist from the cold worlds of Zorith whispered softly, "We don't just see the universe anymore, we feel it trying to stay whole." A technician from the jungle moons of Avra added, "And now we help it." In the heart of Council Prime, High Counselor Vextai gave a speech that echoed across galaxies. Today, we do not celebrate victory. We celebrate memory. We honor those who were cast out but never let go. Humanity left us not because they hated us, but because we had to learn who we were without them. And now we know. A new era began. Not the age of empires, not the cycle of expansion, but something smaller, stronger, the age of witnesses. An era where species remembered what came before them and chose what came next, together. In a quiet corner of space, a single beacon remained, not powered, not active, but watching. It had no signal, no message. Just a small plaque written in human script. We never needed to be gods, we only needed to be heard. And now, finally, we were. But the story continues wherever someone remembers, wherever someone still believes in cause, effect, and choice, wherever someone loves the future enough to give it meaning.